Welcome to the Marriage Circle Connection. We are your hosts today, Doctors Michael and Kendra Holmes. We welcome you to the show today. We hope that we have some insightful information to bring to you today. So call your loved ones, call your family, call your friends. Tell them the Marriage Circle Connection is on the air, and we're coming to you today to bring you some important information. Welcome to the show with me today on the show as our host, Dr. Kendra Holmes.
Yes, absolutely. It's just a wonderful pleasure as always to come into your homes and to share this time with you on the Marriage Circle Connection. We're all about building up marriages, empowering couples, and we want you to know that you can have the most fulfilling marriage that God really has in store for you. And when we come to you each and every time, we love to bring other people with us who are knowledgeable, because everybody has a knowledge base of things that they can share where marriage and relationships are concerned. And there are some people who have experiences that we may not have as the host of the show, but we want to empower you to let you know that regardless of whatever it is that you may face and that you may come in contact with in your marriage, God has an answer, and He provides those answers through people. And oftentimes it comes through experiences that we come upon in our lives as we travel through this journey called marriage. And so we are so excited today to have our special guest on the stage with us in the persons of Jason and Dina Hobbs, and we want to just welcome them to the show. And these are, God has a way of placing people in your path, and so this is a couple that I met. Some of you know, some of you don't know that I am also a news journalist, and so in my journalism, I came across this wonderful couple and had the opportunity to interview them for a newspaper article that I was putting together. And as soon as I finished my interview with them, when I turned the recorder off, I said, okay, off the record, I need you all to come on this show. And so I'm so happy and delighted. They had things scheduled for today because they are new authors. They have a book that is out, and we're going to be talking about that book today because it has a lot to do with the topic that we are addressing on today's show, which is when anxiety strikes. And so they're going to just kind of give us a little bit of background information on themselves, as well as tell us how when anxiety strikes came into your lives.
Thank you all so much. I
Absolutely.
really appreciate being here.
Yes.
Jason Hobbs, I'm a clinical social worker in private practice. Been in that kind of environment for over 15 years now. Have also pastored a United Methodist Church for a few years. Grew up Baptist, so kind of run the gamut a little bit too. So, but there is a way in which the spiritual and the clinical have always come together for me, and so that's a lot about who I am and where I come from.
Yes.
And I'm his wife, Dina Hobbs, and I'm a campus minister to students in colleges here in the Macon area. And I have dealt with an anxiety disorder, panic disorder, since I was 24, so for the past 23 years. And am also a leader in the Christian church, so I've wrestled a lot and thought about what it means to be a Christian who lives with an ongoing mental illness or mental health issue, and in my case, an anxiety disorder. So I've become passionate about helping others through my own experience with that.
Yeah, so let's go back a little bit. Take us back, because even when I was doing the interview with the two of you, I was just so engaged in how the anxiety kind of came upon you and the timing within your relationship that it came, and where you were at the time with you going through school and getting your learning, and you're learning about mental illnesses or stressful situations, and then your wife suddenly has this panic attack in the midst of all of that. So just kind of take us back a little bit. Where did that panic attack stem from, and how were you able to really handle that?
Sure. So I say I was always a timid child or a nervous child, but I don't think anyone, and certainly not myself, understood that was actually anxiety. Even in my early years and my teenage years, people would just say, "Oh, you're very nervous, or I had a very type A personality, was high strung. I got the word high strung a lot. But yeah.
Love the labels, don't we?
Yes, love a label, right? And so I had a chance when I was in seminary to take a trip, a mission trip to Africa, and we had to take a specific anti-malarial drug called Lariam, and we did not know it at that time because it was a new drug that had been put on the market after the Gulf War, but it has some pretty nasty side effects for a certain, I think like maybe 20% of people who took it had. Now it is not on the market anymore. No more Lariam for the world because it was deemed, there were other side effects as well. It was just deemed too dangerous. But in my group, I was one of the people who suffered panic attacks as a result of taking that drug. Now, I was right for a panic attack, right? I was already an anxious person. I just didn't know that yet. I didn't have that language yet. But coming home from the trip, I started to get more and more paranoid is almost the word I would use. And then one night I had my first panic attack, and I didn't know what was happening at first. I just knew I couldn't catch my breath. My heart was racing. Something didn't feel right. I felt very worried, like there was this large sense of doom upon me, and I felt in danger for myself.
And what a lot of people experience with a panic attack really is you feel like you're dying in that moment. And so, and we're in our early 20s, the hospital was nearby, so we decided, all right, we need to go to the ER because something is really wrong here. And so we rushed off to the ER in our,
the wee hours of the morning.
Oh my gosh, it was scary.
And so they, checked my vitals, and the first thing they noticed was my resting pulse was like 125.
Wow.
And that's not normal for a presumably healthy 24-year-old. So they were like, okay, what's going on here? I had echocardiograms. I'm talking to a cardiologist. I'm thinking, I'm going to meet Jesus tonight. I thought this is it. And in a way, I'm a person of faith, so I wasn't, terrified, but I'm 24 years old and a newlywed.
Fairly newly married. And the body effects of that. I mean, one of the things that we emphasize in the book a lot is the way in which, yes, anxiety is something that has to do with our thoughts, but it was such a body experience of the increased heart rate and the muscles tightening and the breathing changes, and it's frightening, physically frightening.
I think a lot of times we focus on the side effects or the symptoms, and we never really get to the root of a situation. I know through dealing with trauma that the mind does not know how to differentiate between childhood trauma and adult trauma. So, but those effects within the body, it has a memory. And so as an adult, you're coming into a relationship with someone that may not know what those triggers are, but they see the outward effects of what's going on. How would you address individuals that may be on the outside looking in, such as you with your wife? How were you able to assist her to navigate through that?
Well, and I think that's... in some sense, that's where there was just this miraculous timing, at least for us. We were fairly newly married, and all of a sudden rushing to the ER and thinking like, what in the world is this going to mean for us? I mean, for us as a couple, for my wife, who I was very concerned about. She was in seminary. I was over at Virginia Commonwealth University working on a Master of Social Work, and in a class where we were talking about diagnostics. So we were talking about symptoms of anxiety, symptoms of depression, symptoms of schizophrenia and bipolar disorder. And so there was a way in which I was in this wonderful milieu, so I could talk to a professor and say like, hey, this is happening. What do we do here? What are the resources that are available? How do we avail ourselves of those resources? And then also for me as a husband, trying to figure out, well, what is my best response to this? Because and I will absolutely say, I know there were things I did, and Dina will probably back this up, that were the absolute wrong thing to do. I mean, you don't tell somebody with anxiety, just snap out of it. Just stop. That doesn't work.
There's a difference in being a clinician and a spouse. Those are two different things.
This is true.
When it's 2 a.m. and your spouse can't calm down and get to sleep, that's a different experience less than 45 minutes in the therapist's office. So that's walking that journey in a different way.
Yeah.
But I would also say we were really lucky at that time. My professors and the Dena students were aware that I was going through something. So we were just surrounded by a community of support that guided us to resources. They helped me connect with a therapist in town, and I followed up with my GP, and he was very understanding of, you are dealing with a specific physical condition as well as a mental condition, because it was having effects on my physical body.
Yes.
So I began seeing him regularly, and he referred me to, at that time I required psychiatric treatment to get on antidepressants because the panic attacks were so severe. Not everyone needs medication.
Right.
So that's definitely a conversation to have with your doctor and to pray about and talk about, with your family. At that time, it was pretty clear that I did, but there are times and I was able to come off of it, and there are times in my life where I was able to be fine without any sort of medication, just doing I don't want to say self-care because that sounds too frivolous, but taking care of myself mentally, physically, and spiritually.
Because there's absolutely a way with panic attacks that because the experience is so scary, you begin to think everything is scary. And so, I mean, it's funny. I still think about, there was one, it wasn't Blockbuster, but it was another video store. Remember back when we had VHS tapes?
The good old days.
But there was one where we went in, and I don't know what it was that triggered it, because sometimes the triggers are, you don't know where they're coming from. But Dina started having a panic attack there, and we could not go back. And rationally, we know it's like, okay, there's nothing scary in the Hollywood video store or whatever it was, but because the experience is there, your body's going to continue to try and react that same way.
Yeah.
And so when we talk about medication, the role for medication often is to get that system to calm down. Even though rationally in your thoughts, you're like, okay, I know this is okay. The body has to calm down, and sometimes the medication is an important part of that.
Yeah, wow. This is awesome. I'm loving the way this conversation is going, and we're going to take a quick break, and we're going to come back, and we really want to talk about the process of writing when anxiety strikes. And how you were able to really, because oftentimes as a writer myself, and when you're writing and it's about you, it's becoming transparent and being able to bare your soul before people, open up yourself to people you don't even know, and expose some things maybe that other people did not know about you. So we want to really talk about that process. But right now we're going to take a break. And while we're on this break, for those of you who are watching, we want you to call a neighbor, grab a friend, let them know that the Marriage Circle Connection is on the air so that they can come back and catch this, because this is some information that we want everybody to receive. So stay right there, call other people to join you. We're going to be right back.
If you enjoy the programming seen here today, consider becoming a sponsor. By supporting Queen Esther Mega Networks, you're helping to spread the promise of redemption and salvation in Middle Georgia and beyond. Your support is vital and appreciated, so please contact us today.
And we are back. Thank you once again for joining us for the Marriage Circle Connection. We are here on today speaking with our special featured guests, Jason and Dina Hobbs, who have joined us to talk about the issue of when anxiety strikes. They have an awesome new book that has been put out that chronicles their journey in dealing with this most important issue that oftentimes marriages deal with, but sometimes people don't talk about. And so we're here to express and to talk about it and to share more insight into anxiety and what to do when it strikes. Very vital information, because in marriage oftentimes we don't really think about those challenges that may come our way, and we don't know when they'll come. It might come on day one, or it might come on 50-year anniversary. We just have to be ready. And so this is really good information to share. And right before we went to break, we were beginning to talk about this book, When Anxiety Strikes. And this is a book that is written by our couple on today's stage. And so it really talks about their experiences of going through this anxiety and having to deal with it on a level where you would have to do it. It's not like this is a patient and a doctor relationship, but this is somebody you go home with, this is somebody you live with.
Yeah.
And so this is a different way to really face this. And so kind of tell us a little bit about when anxiety strikes, about the book, about writing it. And I know this was kind of a long time coming with you really putting pen to paper and doing this, but what I believe is that God has perfect timing for everything. So tell us about this process.
Okay, so we wrote it, we started writing it about 7 years ago. Like I said, after my first episode of panic, I got much better and then stayed better. And there, just depending on what stress was going on in life or chemically what was going on in my body, I had some ups and downs. And in one of my difficult periods with anxiety, I remember waking up one morning and just being so, like, when you're anxious, you wake up exhausted. There's not refreshment.
Yeah.
There's just a constant state of tired. And I remember waking up one morning, and we have a family breakfast and a family devotional with our children every morning. And I remember just putting my head in my hands and thinking, I wish there was a devotional for this. I wish there was something that would help me get going every morning while I struggle with anxiety. And I could not find what I was looking for. And then I just heard this small voice say, write it.
Wow.
Write that devotional. So I broached the idea to Jason that I had started writing a little bit already at that point. I have an Advent devotional I had written already at that point. And I broached the idea to Jason, and he said, actually, what if we write it together?
Wow.
And it's actually a little more than a devotional because Jason talks a lot about the science of anxiety
Yes.
and his techniques that he uses in his therapeutic practice. But then it's also a lot of scripture and a lot of Christian disciplines like gratitude and different specific kinds of prayer and scripture memorization. So we use our rich Christian tradition to help people calm their own. You have to learn how to calm yourself down.
Yeah.
I mean, in the beginning, you need help, but for the long haul, you got to learn how to calm yourself down.
Yeah.
And we've got a lot of resources from our Christian tradition. So we kind of combined our voices to make a full resource for
and
dealing.
And I guess the word I would use for that is very integrative. I mean, there's a way in which we talk a lot about body and mind and spirit, but there's a way in which, there's a lot of science in there about what we have learned about anxiety disorders and what is effective and what is not effective and how to treat those. And so it does go day by day. There's a lot of emphasis in the beginning on using the breath, on a focus on the body, on movement, but then also going into some of the ways that our brain and our mind work, but then also where the spirit comes in.
Yes.
And also, and toward the end of it, we get to a place of looking at community. Now, for us, one of the things that was wonderfully healing and that we had to work through was, I would even argue, the community of our marriage, this sort of small community, but also the way the larger community plays into that. And seeking resources and support, and certainly supportive individuals, which may be clergy, but maybe to other folks in your congregation and community.
Right. Wow. And so how long was this process, like from start to finish? Once you started writing it, how long did it take you to get this done?
Well, so to be perfectly honest, one of the things that we decided to do, because I had been offering classes in the community, and most of the time those classes were about 8 weeks long. And so we decided, hey, let's see if we can write this almost like a curriculum for 8 weeks. So we wrote 4 weeks of it, and then we had the class scheduled. And then we had 4 more weeks to write in pretty much a rush. But
Don't try that at home. Don't.
this is a way to create anxiety, not to soothe it.
Write your curriculum ahead of your class.
All right.
But it ended up, I mean, at some point, it really was almost like it was writing itself. I mean, there were things that, I know I've experienced as a clinician and folks that I've worked with, and then certainly the personal experience, which is all throughout the book that Dina has had.
And I would say there was a lot of Holy Spirit guidance in that as well. I know I had a specific, if you're a writer, you have a specific time, you sit down in front of the computer each day and you write for a specific amount of time, and it just very much felt like a vessel, there was a lot of holy guidance in that. So I don't take a lot of credit for the book.
So what kind of feedback and this is early because your book released last month, correct? Or is it
Just on the 29th of September.
29th of
Yeah.
September?
Recent,
So
okay.
Very
this is
recent.
really,
All right.
Yeah.
really, really new. So what kind of response, or have you gotten much response back?
Actually, we were talking about that on the way to the studio, and the words that keep coming up are gentleness and grace. One of the things that people with mental health concerns often experience is the stigma
Shame,
around that,
yes.
and shame
Yes.
and judgment. And you will not find that in this book.
Okay.
We're
Okay.
very deliberate that we believe that God comes to us with grace
Yes.
and love, and so that's what we hope is reflected in the book and the way we try to write it.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that we were talking about a little bit earlier, about the stigma that comes with people seeking help, professional help for illnesses, and oftentimes in Christendom or in the church,
Very frowned on.
you know, people frown on that. They do, and
Yeah.
there's a lot of shame in seeking help when help is really needed. So what would you say, either or you, both of you?
I'll just tell a small personal story about that. I think one of the second episodes I had with anxiety, I was actually on a church staff, and I started having panic attacks again. And I would have them on Sunday mornings, which was that's not the time you want to have a panic
Right,
attack if
right.
you're in church leadership. And I started going to a therapist, but we were living in Savannah, and I would drive to Hilton Head. Now, it's a pretty drive, but I did it because I was embarrassed. I didn't want anyone to see me in a therapist's office.
Wow.
I had not come to terms with my own shame
Right.
about having. I felt like I was.
So many people do suffer with that.
I felt like I was a bad Christian and a bad Christian leader because I was still struggling with this, and I was not open with very many people about it at that time. Now, I will tell people, oh yeah, I go to therapy, and here's my therapist's name, and they're great, and you can go too,
Yeah.
because I've come to terms with the fact that we're all broken. Everybody's broken in some way because we're human.
Yes.
And our humanness is what leads us to God and God's grace. So I'm not ashamed of that anymore, because that brokenness leads me to Jesus.
Awesome.
Let me ask this question. How would you, to some of our viewing audience, make it comfortable for them in this culture that we are involved in to seek out that type of help? Because many people are crying out in silence. They've created their own fig leaf, so to speak, whether that be drugs, sex, or whatever outlet that they find to try to anesthetize or serve as a type of anesthesia so that they don't have to face the reality of that. Because one of the things that I've done in my studies is, the Word of God tells us that we are to be not conformed to this world, but be ye transformed by the renewing of our mind. Most oftentimes we focus on the conscious mind, but we neglect the subconscious and the unconscious part of our mind. We just leave it out, hanging out there to dry. How can we, as speaking to our viewers, give them the calmness and that they need in order to seek out that type of help?
I tell a lot of people to start with their general practitioner. Or pediatrician, if we're talking about a child or an adolescent. They often know the place to refer. For some, you can, sort of figure out whether your clergy is very receptive or not, and some are. Some are wonderfully receptive, but I've certainly run into some clergy that are not as well, and that's hard to go to the place that you want to go for help and to feel like you're getting more of the shame and the stigma and the judgment. So find that receptive individual. If you don't find that the first time, go ask somebody else. But there is a certain amount of persistence that one has to begin to practice to get there.
Yeah.
And that's a good first step.
So having dealt with this as you all have, and this is something that is controllable, or you can do things to help maintain or control it or what have you, but not necessarily something that goes away. It could be a trigger that happens that would, bring it back or what have you. So through this process, this ongoing healing process and this ongoing process of really, coming to terms with what's there, does it bring you closer together as a married couple, or is it like the elephant in the room that separates you or makes you afraid to talk about it or whatever? How does that affect a marriage as a whole?
I think it could go either way, and I think it depends on how you handle it. If the the spouse of the person who's struggling does have patience and have compassion and wants to educate themselves. We've had, when we taught the classes, sometimes the spouse would come with the person who was struggling with anxiety. And I think that was really helpful.
Oh, yeah.
Because then they could learn, oh, this is why this is helping. So if you're a spouse of someone who's struggling with a mental illness, educate yourself about what that is and what they're going through and how you can be supportive. You can't fix it. That's the really hard part, is you can't fix it. But you can be there with them. And that's so much about our faith, isn't it? Walking with each other and supporting each other and lifting each other up. So I think when he and caregivers do have to take care of themselves, because I know he would get exhausted if I was in a really bad time in a valley. He would get exhausted. So of course you have to take care of yourself, but also, you know, as patient as you can be, as understanding. But then with the person who's struggling, I think to some degree you have to share, you know, as best you can. This is what I'm going through, and this is what I need, and this is why. And even with our children, when they got old enough, we told them, hey, mom has problems with anxiety, and if I'm irritable today, it's not because you've done anything wrong. It's because I'm struggling with something that has nothing to do with you.
Right. And I think that's one, I mean, it's a really important point to make. When we talk about anxiety, it's that fight or flight system in us. And so flight is like, I've got to get away from this thing that's making me anxious or I've been triggered by. But we have to remember that fight is there too. And so sometimes anxiety presents as irritability.
Or anger.
Right. And so then it does become challenging as a spouse to say, okay, she's not angry at me. You know, this is coming from somewhere else. Let me find that place of compassion, which I think, you know, the heart of God is the place of compassion. And so you try to get to there and how you treat your spouse as well, and how you treat yourself when you're feeling tired. And that's important. I mean, this was something that we commit to each other, certainly, but in front of God, in front of the people that are assembled. I mean, that's part of what that covenant relationship is. That covenant relationship is the relationship God has with us.
Awesome. You know, that's an excellent point even to end this session on. And we have run out of time, but I tell you, this is awesome. Now, before we go, I just want to mention when anxiety strikes once again, because there's more information that can really be gotten through this tool, and this is available on Amazon.com to be ordered by this couple. And we're talking about a tool that was written by somebody not just from the side of education, but from also experience. And so there's something to be said about that experience and that education coming together, so you'll hear the practical and the spiritual side of anxiety and the things that can be witnessed as a part of someone who's living through that. So once again, we want to thank the two of you for being here and for sharing of your life and for sharing of your experiences with us, with our audience. And we pray and hope that it has been a blessing. We know that it has opened up some understanding to someone who did not know something before. And that's what it's all about. It's about educating and empowering. And thank you so much. Thank you all once again for joining us and for being a part of the Marriage Circle Connection on today. And as we leave, we want you to remember that the two shall become one flesh.
Your generous one-time gift or monthly contribution keeps programs like this on the air and helps us to spread the gospel teachings of Jesus Christ. Please give what you can today and support the ministries that support us.